WNBA star Brittney Griner will remain detained in Russia for at least a bit longer. Despite being held for 117 days so far, a Russian court determined that she will stay in custody for at least another 18 days. That's according to Russian state media outlet TASS.
Russian authorities apprehended Griner at the airport in Moscow this past February after they allegedly found vape cartridges and hashish oil in her possession. Those substances are illegal there. Griner was in Russia to play basketball. She could be staring at 10 years behind bars. Here to discuss Griner's fate is Kimberly St. Julian Varnon, a PhD student at the University of Pennsylvania. Kimberly, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Kimberly, can you help us understand what has taken so long in repatriating Griner, and why hasn't there been more kind of political, activity, attention to this, or public backlash about this?
So I think you have two different points. So Brittney Griner has been in Russian custody for 118 days now. And so I think to put this in perspective, Trevor Reed was held for over 2 years and Paul Whelan has been in Russian custody for over 4 years. So in terms of the length of time that she's been in detainment, it's relatively short compared to the two other most high-profile Russian cases. But in many ways, Brittney Griner's case is unique, not only because of who she is. She's an internationally known basketball star. She's well-known in Russia. She's played in Russia for well over 7 years, but also because of the immense difference in the diplomacy and the atmosphere of what's going on right now. Brittney Griner was arrested about a week before the war in Ukraine, the Russian war in Ukraine, was declared. So she was arrested at a point where the United States had already had a kind of skeleton of its diplomatic presence in Russia, but also the ask, what the Russians will want for her, will be significantly higher because of her profile, but also because of the diplomatic situation. So kind of keeping that context in mind, when we think about why there hasn't been as much public discussion of her case, particularly from the Biden administration, I think it's because you're trying to weigh the risks of making her more valuable as a political prisoner, but also trying not to change any type of behind the scenes or under the table negotiations that could be going on between the Biden administration and the Putin administrations right now.
Do you think the fact that she was detained and arrested is an example of the Russian government, how they're obviously how they're handling it now has to do with the diplomatic situation, but was there let's grab her because we're upset at the U.S. anyway, or was it or even there's been some suggestion, right, they could have planted drugs on her. I think I saw you on Twitter say that was unlikely in this case because it is legitimately difficult. There's a long list of substances that are legal in America, not legal in Russia. This can be a confusing kind of thing. But maybe talk to us a little bit about what goes into the decision to arrest, detain her, and then keep her anyway from the Russian standpoint.
So the Russian legal code that Brittney Griner is being held under. So I believe it's Article 218, and there are two different parts of this. And so usually people are arrested under the first part, which is equivalent to possession, and thousands of Russian citizens are arrested under this article, and they're usually false arrests, and they are having drugs or drug kind of narcotics kind of put on them, and these are, not actually the case. But Brittney Griner's charge is much more significant. She's being charged with the equivalent of narcotics trafficking. And so I think the type of charge that's being used against her is definitely politically infused. This could have been a simple possession charge, but that isn't the case, because she could have paid the fine and been released. So I think the political situation definitely influences what she's been charged with. I think the fact that she's an American also influenced the way she was charged. But also, I cannot divorce her detainment and the way she was detained. And it took forever to actually find out that she had been arrested and that she had been detained. And that information was released after the war with Ukraine had started. So I can't kind of divorce those. But in many ways, it is possible for an American to travel to a place like Russia and to have substances that are legal in the United States that are illegal in Russia, because the law, particularly on vapes and things like that, is very much in flux in Russia. And it's being used, it's kind of staying in flux to be used against Russian citizens. And sometimes foreigners get caught into that.
I hear you saying that part of the lack of political attention that you might see from, say, the Biden administration, or vocal attention anyway, is because they don't want Brittney Griner to become, a pawn that can be used in negotiations when time it's already so sensitive given the war in Ukraine. But there has been some suggestion from, Black Twitter people who are very frustrated about the lack of attention, that say this is really about people's disinterest in Black women or queer women, and that if this were, let's say, LeBron James in Russian custody, everyone would be talking about it regardless of the diplomatic implications, and that, the United States would be much more invested in bringing him home quickly. What do you say to people who've been raising those types of criticisms?
I think if this was LeBron James, I've also seen a lot of people talking on Twitter about if this was Tom Brady, we probably wouldn't even know that they were being detained because Russia also released Brittney Griner's mugshot, right? So that's kind of like a proof of life picture. But I think the problem is we can't think about how she's being treated in terms of like American understandings. The ask that will be for Brittney Griner will be incredibly high. Russia uses foreigners, particularly Americans, to get prisoner swaps and prisoner exchanges. It's kind of like a way of holding Americans hostage to get what Russia wants. And for many months, Russia has been wanting the release of Victor Bout, who is in American custody in a federal prison. He's been convicted of selling arms to terrorists and selling arms to like a lot of people that we have deemed incredibly dangerous. And Russia has been talking about getting him freed for months before Brittney Griner was arrested. So this is the problem. I don't think that America is being quiet, particularly the Biden administration is being quiet because no one cares about Brittney Griner. Thousands of people care about her. Millions of Americans care about her. But I think it's also trying to understand that the way we approach her case, we have to be careful because of the diplomatic situation, but also understanding that in the long term and kind of understanding how the Russian legal system works, America has very little here in terms of negotiations. Russia holds the cards. And so this is what's at stake is Brittney Griner's life. And Putin and the Kremlin are the ones who are ultimately going to decide when and if she'll be released to the United States anytime soon.
So the sentence she's potentially facing is very, very long. So that I should think that our government is not really would not consider like, oh well, we don't. We have negotiated right in the past with even more reprehensible people, with actual literal terrorist groups. We made swaps. Sometimes through back channels, but it does happen. So my expectation here would be that something will be worked out, right? Even if it involves giving the Russians some high price.
Absolutely, and I think this is something to keep in mind. It's kind of like every movie and every TV series. There's a lot going on behind the scenes that we aren't being told about. The American public isn't being told about. And we kind of have to trust in that, even though we don't like to. But this is a normal thing in terms of diplomacy and negotiating the release of foreign hostages. And that's the way we can kind of think about Brittney Griner. She is being wrongfully detained. And we've also said Paul Whelan, who's also been in Russian custody for 4 years, is being wrongfully detained. And he's facing, I think his sentence is 16 years and he's been sentenced. Trevor Reed was facing a significantly, I think, 9-year sentence. And he was released, but he was part of this prisoner exchange, but also he was in bad shape. There are medical reports about him since November 2021 that he was facing tuberculosis and COVID. So we have to kind of keep all these things into play, but with the understanding that I would say this, the reason why Brittney Griner was detained isn't just, she broke the law. There are significant things at play here. And what Putin will expect from the United States, a minimum, I would argue, is that they will want the release of Victor Bout. We also have to understand that Brittney Griner's future is tied to the future of the Ukrainian war, because we have been vocal supporters and financial supporters of the Ukrainians in their fight against Russia. And I don't see Russia leaving that part out of their ask for Brittney Griner, possibly Paul Whelan's releases.
Yeah, it is kind of incredible that given the stakes here, and that this isn't the first time, that there isn't more kind of oversight from the WNBA and kind of almost national investment in making sure that American citizens aren't in these situations, assuming, of course, that this, is a good faith charge and not drugs being planted on a person, as you said sometimes happens. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kimberly.
Thank you.
And we'll have more Rising for you after this.